Vexora 9 was no place for softness. The city bloomed like a rusted flower of steel, all sharp edges and blinking neon veins, its underbelly soaked in oil and silence. Above the spires, rich merchant cruisers glided through artificial clouds, but down below, the air reeked of ozone, poverty, and the slow decay of hope. The rain had a taste here: copper, ash, and resignation. Corporal Tavern Juno walked his patrol route through the market slums like he always did, boots splashing through gutter streams that carried more broken dreams than water. He was off duty, weapon holstered, helmet unsealed, face bare to the chill. He didn't wear the smug smirk of the other soldiers from the Earth Coalition stationed here. He wore a quiet look, like someone who had seen too much, survived too much, and still hadn't figured out why. That was when he saw her. She didn't sit. She collapsed, crouched beneath the shattered canopy of a noodle stall long since abandoned. Her skin was a soft violet hue, mottled with grime and scars, thin enough that her ribs looked like alien ruins beneath her threadbare tunic. One eye was swollen shut. The other was golden. Not the way coins gleam, but the way dawn hits metal after a long night. She didn't beg, she just stared. Tavran slowed, watching her as the crowd streamed past without pause. A group of drunken traders bumped into her. She didn't flinch. A hover cart rolled through a puddle and splashed her knees. Still, she didn't move. He approached, unsure why his feet pulled him. "Hey," he said softly. No reply. Her ears twitched, long and frayed, remnants of a species Tavern couldn't place. She must have been from one of the collapsed sectors, maybe a refugee from the Oryxy moons, maybe a slave turned stray. The Coalition files were full of such stories, always ending the same: lost, starved, forgotten. "Do you understand me?" he tried again. Slowly, she nodded, barely perceptible. Her hands, gnarled and clawed, remained hidden in her lap. Rain ran down her face like it had claimed her long ago. He crouched, peeling off his weathered tactical coat. She flinched when he reached toward her. So he paused, laid it down on the concrete beside her instead. "It's warm. You can have it." She stared. Then, with trembling fingers, she pulled it around her shoulders. That's when he saw it. Tears. Not from pain, not from cold, but from something deeper: disbelief. Someone had seen her. Not as a shadow, but as someone. Tavran looked at the buildings above them: broken lights, fractured glass, a skyline jagged like old wounds. Then he looked back at her. "Come with me," he said, and to his surprise, she did. Tavran's flat wasn't much. A single room carved into the bones of a retired mining rig turned military housing. The walls hummed faintly with old power, patched wires snaking like lazy vines, and the smell of solder and boiled coffee hung in the air like a habit he couldn't shake. He hadn't cleaned in 3 days. Not out of laziness. Just loneliness. The door slid shut behind them. She stood just inside the threshold, eyes darting, fingers clutching his coat like armor. "You can sit," he offered, gesturing to the bed, not out of presumption, but because it was the only furniture besides the bench by the window. She didn't move. "Are you hungry?" That got a reaction. She nodded once, sharp and mechanical, like movement was something she had to borrow. He turned toward the kitchenette, reheating a ration pack. The hiss of steam filled the space, and the smell of vegetable broth cut through the silence. Behind him, she remained still, watching. "I don't have much," he said, placing the warm bowl on the table, "but it's hot and clean." She approached slowly, like a stray expecting to be kicked. Her claws tapped the table's edge as she lowered herself down. The spoon confused her. She picked it up backwards, tried to lift the soup, failed, set it down again. Tavern didn't speak. He just turned the spoon in her hand, gently, patiently, and stepped back. She tried again. This time, it worked. The moment the broth hit her lips, her eyes widened like a curtain had lifted. She devoured it. Not like a beast, but like someone afraid it would disappear if she blinked. Every time he turned away, she stopped eating. Every time he looked back, she started again. "You don't have to fear me," he said softly. No answer. "Can I ask your name?" Her head tilted. "Name," she whispered, the syllables strange on her tongue. Tavern nodded. She frowned, looked down at her hands. Then she whispered something that sounded like Vela. He smiled. "Vela," he repeated, like it was a promise. She looked up sharply. No one had said it that way before. Not like it mattered. Not like it meant something. Later that night, he handed her a clean blanket. She took it with reverence, like silk gifted by royalty. She didn't sleep on the bed. She curled on the floor beside it, beneath his coat, holding the blanket like it was the last good thing she might ever feel. Tavern didn't move her. He just sat by the window, watching stars flicker over the edge of the scrapyard. And somewhere between the hiss of rain and the hum of his heart, a soldier and a stray began to unknowingly rewrite their galaxies, one silent breath at a time. Days passed like unspoken poems, quiet, slow, each moment layered with meaning too delicate to name. Vela didn't speak much. Her words came in broken fragments, patched together with gestures and glances, but she listened, intently, as though every word Tavron offered was a treasure she didn't yet know how to hold. She stayed curled in corners, never turning her back to the door, and flinched at loud footsteps outside the flat. When Tavron opened the cabinets, she winced like he might throw something. He never did. Instead, he moved slowly around her, a rhythm of consideration, like learning a new language not with his mouth, but with his movements. He brewed tea each morning and set 2 cups out, even though she only touched hers after watching him drink his. He left his datapad unlocked, turned so she could read the entries if she wanted to. She never did, but she noticed. One morning, he returned from duty and found her trying to sweep the floor with a scrap of cloth wrapped around her wrist. She didn't ask permission. She just wanted to give something back. Tavron didn't stop her, but he did show her where the actual broom was and how to adjust it for her height. The smallest things mattered. When she spoke, it was usually at night, just before sleep, when the world was quiet and soft. One evening, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the heater, she murmured, "Do you own this place?" Tavron looked up from tightening a bolt on his gear. "It's leased by the unit. But yeah, it's mine while I'm stationed here." She nodded, as if digesting something that was never allowed in her world. "Have you always had a bed?" He blinked, then smiled. "Since I was a kid, yeah? Why?" She looked at his bed, then at the floor where she still slept by choice. "It feels wrong that I have one now." Tavron closed his toolkit and crossed the room, sitting down beside her. "It only feels wrong because they taught you comfort was something you had to beg for. But it isn't. Not here." Vela stared at her hands, the claws dull and scarred. "You say that like it's easy." He didn't answer. Instead, he gently reached out and placed his hand over hers, not forcefully, just resting, grounding. For the first time, she didn't pull away. She let the warmth sit there between them, quiet and uncertain. And then, without lifting her gaze, she whispered, "I used to sleep in pipes, warmest spots in the undersectors, sometimes with rats." Tavron's hand didn't move. She added, "They bit less than people." Her voice didn't shake, but his chest did. He didn't speak that night. He just slid a second pillow onto the bed beside the first and left the door open so she could choose. When he awoke the next morning, she was still on the floor, but the pillow was under her head. The riot started in District 6. The humans said it was about stolen rations. The aliens said it was about another unreported beating. Either way, the coalition locked the sector gates, posted riot bots at every junction, and let fear do its quiet work. Tavron was stationed near the perimeter, just another uniform in a line of riot-controlled grunts holding stun rods they prayed they wouldn't have to use. He didn't see her coming. Not until she was in the middle of the street, wide-eyed, heart-thudding, caught in the chaos with a pack of frightened street children she tried to lead to safety. A shockwave from a sonic cannon had collapsed the south wall of a shelter, and the children, thin, terrified, barely clothed, had scattered. Vela had gone after them. The moment Tavron saw her in the crosshairs of a mounted drone, he didn't think. He ran. He dropped his weapon, tore off his helmet, and sprinted through tear gas and panic. Shouts from his commander echoed in his comms. He yanked the mask from a crying child's face, lifted 2 others, threw his body over Vela's as a stun charge cracked against his back. He didn't feel the second one. When he woke in the medbay, 3 ribs were broken and his shoulder was blackened. But Vela was there, sitting by his bedside. She hadn't left. Not once. "You shouldn't have run," she whispered, eyes glowing like liquid metal. "You shouldn't have been there," he replied. "I couldn't leave them," she said. "Neither could I." A long silence passed. Then, in a voice so fragile it nearly cracked under its own weight, she said, "No one's ever run toward me before, only away." Tavron reached out, his hand trembling, and cupped her cheek. I don't run from people I care about. Her eyes shimmered. I'm not something you should care about. You're wrong, he said. No one's named me in years. He looked at her, heart tight. Then I will. She blinked. I'll name you again every day if I have to. I'll remind you that you matter until the stars fall out of the sky. Her breath caught, slow and unsure, as if love itself was a language she had never been taught. Then she nodded, just once. And in that moment, between wounds and whispers, a nameless girl and a tired soldier began to write a future that neither believed they were worthy of. But both were ready to build. The winter storms came early to Vexora 9 that cycle, and the solar winds howled through the city's broken ducts like hungry ghosts. Tavern's quarters, reinforced though they were, rattled under the pressure, and the lights flickered with each gust that slammed the mining ridge below. Most soldiers stayed in barracks during these times, but Tavern had long since refused to give up his private space, and now, for the first time in years, it wasn't just his. Vela had moved from floor to bed. She did it without announcement, without fanfare, without permission. One morning, Tavern woke up to find her curled in the far corner of the mattress, her knees tucked to her chest, breathing slow. The blanket covered them both. He didn't say a word. He simply shifted slightly so she'd have more room and went back to sleep with a small smile tugging at his mouth. During the storm days, the base went into limited operations mode. Patrols were cut short, training drills canceled. It was the only time Tavern could truly rest, and Vela seemed to come alive in the quiet that followed. She cooked now. With strange ingredients she scavenged from the outer district vendors, blending earth rations with her people's herbs. The food was often too spicy, too sweet, or both. But it was hers. Tavron ate every bite. He gave her a space by the window to keep her own things. It started with a satchel, then a book she couldn't read but liked to hold, and then a small glass orb filled with drifting starlight powder. He'd never seen one before and asked her where she got it. She shrugged and said, "It reminds me that stars still exist, even if you live underground." Tavern began teaching her more Terran phrases, and she surprised him with how quickly she picked them up. At first, her voice cracked every time she tried to speak a full sentence, as if the words themselves were too heavy. But over time, her speech smoothed. The sharp edges of fear melted into soft vowels of trust. One night, as lightning cracked outside and metal groaned in the wind, she sat beside him with a cup of steaming brew and asked, "Do you think they'll ever see me as anything but what I was?" He turned to her. "No, not all of them." Her eyes dimmed. "But I don't see you as that," he added quickly. "And the ones that matter, they won't either." She stared into the drink. "I don't know who I'm becoming." "You're not becoming," he said. "You're returning to who you were before they told you not to be." She looked at him for a long moment, then leaned her head on his shoulder. He didn't move, and she didn't lift it. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of something neither of them had the vocabulary for, yet. The knock came just after dusk, harsh and impatient, 3 precise raps that didn't belong to any of Tavern's friends or usual commanding officers. He rose slowly, reaching for the sidearm he kept under the workbench. Vela instinctively stepped back toward the inner corridor, vanishing behind the half-wall that shielded the sleeping space. When he opened the door, the cold rushed in, and with it, Lieutenant Commander Balin Quire. Quire was the kind of man who walked like he owned the station, even though he technically didn't. His silver-trimmed coat bore medals he never earned in combat, and his boots clicked with the arrogance of someone used to being feared, not respected. His eyes moved through the flat quickly, landing on every personal item like they offended him. "Tavran," he said, with a smile that never touched his eyes, "you've been avoiding transfer offers." "I've been declining them," Tavran replied coolly. Quire nodded toward the hallway behind him. "She's still here?" Tavran didn't flinch. "She lives here," Quire smirked. "Interesting choice. You know what the brass thinks of fraternizing with unregistered species, especially ones without papers." "She's not a threat," Tavern said sharply. "No," Quire replied, "but she is inconvenient. You've got skill, Juno, discipline, history. You could be wearing silver by now, but instead you're playing house with a ghost." Tavron stepped closer. "She's not a ghost. She's the most present soul on this entire base." Quire's tone dropped. Then you're going to have to choose. There's a transfer opening on Arcadia 7. You take it, we start fresh, clean file, better pay, or you stay here and keep living in the shadows with someone the system won't ever recognize. Tavron's fists clenched. Then, before he could respond, Vela stepped out. She wore no makeup, no armor, just her soft eyes and sharp truth. I'm not asking him to stay, she said softly, but I will never ask him to leave either. Quire looked at her like she was dirt. No one asked you, creature. Tavron moved faster than thought. His fist connected with Quire's jaw, sending the officer stumbling back against the doorframe. Blood welled at the corner of his mouth, his eyes wide with stunned disbelief. You forget yourself, Tavron said, voice low and sharp. This creature has more honor than your entire command chain combined. Quire wiped his mouth. That's assault, Juno. No, Vela corrected him, stepping forward, eyes like daggers. That's a promise. Quire left. He didn't slam the door, he didn't threaten, because he saw something in that moment. A bond forged not in lust or sympathy, but in fire and survival. Something that couldn't be ordered apart. Later that night, Tavron sat by the window, rubbing his bruised knuckles. Vela walked over with a bowl of ice and placed it on his lap. You shouldn't have hit him, she said. He smirked. You didn't say that when I did. I'm saying it now because I know you'd do it again. He looked up at her. You're worth it. She didn't smile. She glowed. And for the first time since arriving on Vexora 9, she believed it. Tavron didn't expect the tribunal summons to come so soon, but in truth, he was glad it did. The air around base operations had turned heavy since the altercation with Commander Quire. Whispers followed him down the halls, some laced with admiration, others sharpened with contempt. His peers avoided eye contact. A few of the younger recruits, those who had once looked up to him, now looked past him, like siding with someone contaminated by charity was too much to risk. But he walked into the hearing chamber with a spine of iron. Vela wasn't allowed inside. They made that clear. She stood at the far end of the corridor, her hands wrapped tightly around the sleeves of her patched robe, her gaze fixed on the sealed metal doors like she could burn her way through them if she stared long enough. Tavron turned before entering. He met her eyes. She didn't speak, didn't beg, didn't tremble. She just nodded once as if to say, whatever happens in there, you still have me. Inside, the tribunal chamber was cold and sterile, polished chrome, high-backed seats, monitors mounted along the walls to record every detail. 3 officers presided, a general, a counselor, and a representative from Earth's coalition authority. Quire was present, his jaw faintly bruised but his uniform immaculate, his expression smug behind carefully measured restraint. Corporal Tavron Juno, the general began, you are charged with assaulting a superior officer, refusing a direct transfer, and compromising military protocol by harboring an undocumented alien in coalition housing. Do you have anything to say before proceedings begin? Tavron stood straight, eyes forward. Yes, he said, I do. They waited. He took a breath. I assaulted a man who called the person I love a creature. The room stiffened. I refused a transfer because I would not leave behind the woman who has survived things none of you can imagine and who still believes in kindness. And if the coalition calls that a breach of loyalty, then I stand here as a soldier proud to breach it again. The counselor leaned forward. You admit to housing an unregistered alien species. Do you understand the implications, legally, diplomatically, militarily? I understand this, Tavron said. I didn't bring in a threat. I brought in a life. She eats our food, she helps repair our machines, she speaks our language, and in every way that matters, she belongs more than half the men I've seen in this uniform. The general frowned. You defy the chain of command. I obey a greater one, Tavron said. The one that says, we don't leave good people in the gutter just because they don't carry the right blood. The room fell silent. The coalition rep typed something on his pad, then looked up. Effective immediately, your command post is revoked, your clearance is stripped, you will be discharged and escorted to civil review for reassignment. Tavron didn't react. He reached up slowly, unclipped his badge, and held it in his palm. Then, without permission, he set it down on the tribunal table, turned around and walked out. No salute, no goodbye. He stepped into the corridor and found her waiting. Vela's hands rose to her lips when she saw him. No uniform, no command bars, just him. Her breath caught. He said nothing, just reached out, took her hand, and led her away from the building as the cold wind blew through the towers of Vexora 9 like the howl of old forgotten stars. They didn't speak for a long time. They didn't have to. He had chosen, and she had always been waiting to be chosen. The outpost's outer rim was no longer patrolled by uniformed soldiers, and Tavron no longer had quarters on the main base. But with the credits he'd saved and the favors he hadn't yet cashed in, he managed to buy a small dome-frame cabin just beyond the docking fields. It was quiet, unmarked, and old, but it was theirs. Together, they rebuilt it, piece by piece. Vela turned the solar receiver panels herself, adjusting their angle until the charge readings hummed just right. Tavron rewired the communications hub with a salvaged uplink device, one Vela had found buried beneath a decommissioned shuttle. Every wall was painted by hand, every bolt replaced with care, every room lined with soft cloth and trinkets that belonged to neither Earth nor her homeworld but something in between. They had no title, no flag, but they had each other, and in time, word began to spread. First it was one, then two, then a family of three. Other aliens, undocumented, wounded, unwanted, found their way to the cabin on the edge of the wind. Tavron never turned them away. Vela never let them leave hungry. She cooked with the same passion she'd once reserved for hiding. She laughed now out loud, like sunlight breaking through the steel-clouded skies. Her accent was still thick, her grammar flawed, but her voice was clear. "This," she said one evening, gesturing to the mismatched furniture, the repurposed antennae, the smell of stew and old wires, "is the first place I've lived where the walls don't whisper shame." Tavron leaned in, brushing a strand of silver from her cheek. "And you are the first person I've known who makes every wall feel like home." That night, as rain tapped gently against the dome above them, Vela reached into her satchel and pulled out something small. Thin, folded cloth. Time-worn but preserved. She unfolded it. A veil. Once used to cover her face on the streets, back when she was nothing but a shadow in the gutters. She laid it on the fire gently. It burned fast, with no smoke. She turned to Tavron, tears in her eyes, but not of grief, of shedding. "Do you still want to marry me?" she asked, voice trembling. He didn't answer with words. He kissed her like the stars had given them one more chance, and every broken moment in their past had been a stepping stone to this. And somewhere, deep in the silence of that flame, the beggar girl who once feared her own name was finally, truly, and irreversibly free. Months passed like a slow dance beneath unfamiliar constellations. The refuge on the outskirts of Vexora 9, once only a flicker of shelter for two broken souls, had become something more. Word of the human who turned down rank to shelter a beggar alien woman spread far beyond their district, carried by travelers, smugglers, and deserters alike. Some called it foolishness, some whispered heretic, but most called it hope. That was why the delegation came. 3 shuttles landed in the dust-blown field near the cabin, their hulls bearing the pale insignia of the Oshal Dominion, Vela's birth world. Nobles, priests, and armored sentries stepped onto the soil she had once crawled away from in shame. The lead envoy was her cousin, Mazek, tall and perfect in every measurable way, with golden eyes that flickered like knives beneath his ornate crest. Vela stood at the doorway without fear. Tavron didn't speak. He stood behind her, silent and steady, his presence like a mountain she could lean on without ever falling. The delegation offered her a scroll, a petition for reinstatement of her bloodline, reparations, and the title she'd been stripped of since birth. They called her sister. They called her heir. They said the exile had been a mistake. She looked at them with a gaze so calm it was terrifying. "Why now?" she asked. Mazek smiled thinly. "Because the galaxy is watching, and your name carries weight again." Tavron stepped forward. "So you come not because she's your blood, but because others have found her worthy." One of the sentries hissed, hand twitching near his blade. Vela raised her hand, stopping them cold. "You rejected me when I begged for water. You spat on me when I tried to speak. You erased me." Mazek replied, "And yet still we offer peace." She stared at the scroll, then gently, without anger, tore it in half. "I am not the child you buried. I am not the shadow you threw away. I belong to no crown that only values me when I shine. I belong to this man, and to the world we built without your permission." No one moved. No one spoke. The wind carried the torn parchment into the field. Mazek's expression darkened. You've turned your back on your ancestors? Vela smiled faintly, her voice a whisper like steel. No, I've honored them by surviving the way they never could. The delegation left. They didn't look back. The wedding wasn't grand. It wasn't even official, at least not by any coalition or galactic standard. But the outpost gathered anyway. Humans and aliens, young and old, broken and healing. They came in mismatched uniforms, salvaged cloaks, bare feet, and borrowed rings. They came because they knew. Because the kind of love that built a sanctuary in the ruins deserved to be witnessed. Tavern wore no medals, just a clean shirt and a small pin Vela had made from a bent data drive and a flower stem. She stood beneath the old solar array wrapped in threadbare silk, the starlight orb glowing behind her like a second moon. There were no vows read from data scrolls. Just a promise, spoken with hands held, foreheads touching, hearts bared. I saw you when the world didn't, he said. And you loved me before I could, she replied. They kissed as the wind picked up, scattering petals and laughter through the dusty yard. Later that night, Tavran sat on the roof with Vela beside him, their fingers laced, watching the sky blink and breathe. Do you ever miss it? She asked. The uniform, the order, the weight of command. He thought for a long time. No, he finally said, because this is the first command I've ever truly followed. She turned her head. What command is that? He kissed the back of her hand softly. Stay. And she did. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because for the first time in all the galaxies that never wanted her, she chose to. And in the quiet hum of a home that had once been just metal and dust, their story unfolded, not as a legend told in data archives, but as something deeper. Something real. Something loved.